Beneath one of the most photographed bridges in the world lies a sealed wooden chamber no visitor can enter. It sits below the East River, buried under stone, mud, and more than a century of traffic. Men once worked there in compressed air, cutting into the riverbed while their bodies absorbed a danger engineers did not yet fully understand. Above them, for steel wire cables would rise into the skyline. Inside those cables, defective wire would later be discovered after removal was no longer practical. The Brooklyn Bridge became a monument to modern engineering. But its construction was also a chain of hidden rooms, fatal accidents, compromised materials, and decisions made under pressure. And at the center of that chain stood a family repeatedly pushed to the edge. John Roebling, who died before construction began. Washington Roebling, whose illness removed him from the site. And Emily Roebling, who learned the technical language of the bridge well enough to keep the project moving. To understand why the bridge still stands, the story has to begin before the towers existed, when Brooklyn and New York were separate cities facing each other across dangerous water. The East River was not truly a river but a tidal strait. Fast, crowded, exposed to fog, winter ice, and the constant movement of ships. A fixed crossing promised speed and growth. It also had to clear the masts below and span farther than any suspension bridge than standing. Many engineers considered the proposal visionary at best and reckless at worst. John Augustus Roebling had spent decades preparing to prove them wrong. His design combined massive stone towers, formed steel wire cables, diagonal stays, and an elevated promenade above the traffic deck. The bridge would stretch more than 6,000 feet with its approaches, while its central span would reach nearly 1,600 feet across open water. Before the first foundation was lowered, the project suffered its first loss. On June 28, 1869, a ferry pinned John Roebling's foot against a piling. His crushed toes were amputated, but tetanus followed. Less than a month later, the designer was dead. His bridge remained on paper, and its future passed to his 32-year-old son, Washington. Washington was not simply inheriting a title. He had engineering training, Civil War experience, and direct knowledge of his father's suspension systems. Formal construction began in early 1870. The first challenge was not the towers above the river, but the ground hidden beneath it. A pneumatic caisson was essentially an enormous wooden box turned upside down, sealed at the top, and open against the riverbed below. Compressed air pushed back the water. Airlocks moved men and debris between ordinary pressure above and the artificial atmosphere below. Inside, the pressure could hold the river out, but it created a workplace of heat, noise, damp timber, poor air, and relentless physical labor. The deeper the caisson sank, the higher the air pressure had to rise. The human body became part of the engineering calculation. Men entered through narrow chambers, worked long shifts, and climbed back toward the surface through pressure changes that could strike without warning. The illness they called the bends could bring joint pain, paralysis, confusion, or death. Today, it is recognized as decompression sickness. Some workers recovered, others never did. Historical counts vary, but the American Society of Civil Engineers records 20 deaths during construction. Fire added another danger. The timber caissons were treated and packed, yet sparks, lamps, and pressurized air could turn a small flame into disaster. The Manhattan caisson descended through difficult material, but it did not reach solid bedrock. Washington accepted a foundation resting on dense sand. When excavation ended, the chambers were filled, sealed, and forgotten. The most dangerous rooms of the bridge became part of its permanent foundation. Above those sealed chambers, masonry rose slowly. Granite and limestone blocks transformed invisible foundations into two towers unlike anything on the skyline. The pointed arches looked medieval, but their purpose was modern. They carried the cables high enough to suspend a road over one of the busiest waterways on Earth. Yet Washington Roebling was increasingly absent from the site. His own visits to the caissons had left him severely ill and often confined indoors. From his Brooklyn Heights residence, he studied progress through a telescope and sent detailed instructions to the engineers working below. That system depended on Emily Warren Roebling. At first, she carried messages. Soon, the messages required far more than simple delivery. Emily learned higher mathematics, cable construction, material behavior, and the language of the project well enough to discuss decisions with contractors and officials. She visited the site, answered questions, recorded progress, and defended her husband's authority when rivals argued that he should be removed. Calling Emily merely a messenger misses the point. She became a technical intermediary whose judgment helped keep a 13-year construction effort moving. With the towers complete, the next challenge was to connect them across a void almost half a kilometer wide. Master Mechanic E.F. Farrington crossed first in a bosun's chair, suspended high above the river while crowds watched from both shores. A narrow temporary footbridge followed. Workers crossed it daily before any permanent roadway existed beneath their feet. The main cables were not lifted into place as finished ropes. Thousands of individual steel wires were carried back and forth, then gathered into immense bundles. Each of the four main cables would contain more than 5,000 wires, compressed, wrapped, and protected against weather. The work demanded accuracy at a height where wind, vibration, and a drop tool could threaten everyone below. Then inspectors discovered that part of the wire supplied by contractor J. Lloyd Hay failed to meet the required standard. By then, much of it was already inside the cables. Removing every strand would have meant dismantling years of work. Washington calculated that the bridge still retained a large safety margin, then ordered additional high-quality wire to strengthen every main cable. The episode exposed a less romantic truth. Even a masterpiece depends on contracts, inspections, suppliers, and decisions made after mistakes can no longer be erased. As the cables settled into place, vertical suspenders and diagonal stays began carrying the stiffened deck between the towers. In 1878, a wire slipped during construction, killing 2 men and injuring others, a reminder that danger remained above the river as well as below it. Below, the deck took shape piece by piece. Beams, trusses, rails, road surfaces, and the elevated path that would make the bridge famous. The central promenade was raised above the traffic, turning the crossing into something new. Infrastructure that also offered a public view over the city. Building the approaches required its own transformation. Streets shifted, buildings were removed, and enormous anchorages consumed entire blocks on both sides. After roughly 13 years of work and a cost near $15 million, the bridge was finally ready to open on May 24, 1883. Emily Roebling received the honor of the first ceremonial crossing, a public recognition that only hinted at the work she had performed for years. President Chester A. Arthur, New York officials, and immense crowds followed. Ships filled the river as cannon fire and celebration announced a new connection. At opening, it was the world's longest suspension bridge and briefly among the tallest structures in North America, a machine presented as a monument. But public confidence was fragile. 6 days later, panic on the promenade caused a deadly crush, proving that the bridge's human risks did not end with construction. In 1884, P.T. Barnum marched 21 elephants and 17 camels across the span, turning a publicity stunt into a public test of confidence. The bridge changed travel, commerce, and the psychological distance between the two cities. Brooklyn would not formally join Greater New York until 1898. The new crossing was also a business. Pedestrians paid a small toll, and bridge staff counted the constant flow through booths at both ends. Rail service soon joined carriages and pedestrians, compressing the distance between home, work, docks, and markets on opposite shores. At each shore, the cables disappear into enormous stone anchorages, where iron chains transfer their force into plates buried inside the masonry. Some of the vast approach vaults gained another life as storage rooms. On the Manhattan side, cool chambers were even rented as wine cellars. The diagonal stays remain one of the easiest clues to Roebling's caution. They make the bridge look different from a pure suspension span. For decades, people called it the East River Bridge or the New York and Brooklyn Bridge. Its familiar official name arrived only in 1915. From Dumbo and the waterfront, the bridge now frames a transformed city. Yet its stone, wire, and buried timber still belong to the 19th century. Over time, traffic systems changed, rails disappeared, roadways were rebuilt, and maintenance crews replaced vulnerable parts while preserving the original towers and cables. The towers still rise from foundations most visitors will never see. The caissons remain buried, carrying loads in permanent darkness beneath the river. Emily's notebooks, Washington's calculations, John Roebling's design, and the labor of hundreds survive in one structure, though history remembers them unevenly. Today, the bridge is photographed for what stands above the East River. Its most revealing story is the one concealed beneath the water and inside its cables. The Brooklyn Bridge endures because bold ideas were matched by calculation, adaptation, and labor performed in places the public could not see. Its beauty rises above the river. Its hidden cost remains below, inside sealed chambers, strained bodies, compromised wire, and names that never entered the monument's legend.